Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. I was away for 2 weeks because we moved from Yerushalayim to Ra'anana, big change. I'm still getting everything organized, but we've settled down enough for me to resume the weekly class. So I'm very happy to be here. So this week, we're not going to talk about the Parsha. This week, we're going to talk about the very special day that's coming this week, which is the 15th day of Av, 15 B'Av, or as people are accustomed to say in our times, they call it Tu B'Av, like Tu B'Shvat, but of course it means just the 15th day of Av, and it's coming this Wednesday, and it's one of the most interesting, mysterious days in the Jewish calendar, and it has a lot of very deep ideas going on behind it and the meaning of it. So we want to start exploring this. So we're starting with a source, a rabbinic source that tells us something about this day, the 15th day of Av, and it talks actually about 2 days. It talks about one day, which is the most famous or the most holy day, let's say, in the Jewish calendar. That's Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement, and the other day is this day. And just the two of them being together on one page is a kind of odd couple. Because Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the calendar, and it's a deoraita holiday, meaning it's from the written Torah. It's not a later tradition coming from the oral Torah. And then it goes together with this very little known day that we know very little about. That is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, in the Tanakh. It's only later traditions. But then they're coming together, this kind of odd couple. And Chazal say that these 2 days were the happiest days for the people of Israel ever. Every year, they were the happiest of days. Why were they the happiest of days? Because they were days in which there was held a ceremony of matchmaking. And the ceremony was very beautiful, very interesting. All the women in Jerusalem, or in another version, all the women generally, not just in Jerusalem, would all wear white. And they would, in fact, exchange their clothes, so you couldn't tell the rich ones from the poor ones. They didn't want to embarrass those who didn't have beautiful dresses, so they all wore white dresses, and they went out to the vineyards, and they all danced in circles, and then the men would come, and they would choose their brides. It was this very festive, beautiful event that is not held in our generation, and it was 2 days of matchmaking. So that's very, very interesting. And we can't even imagine something like this happening on Yom Kippur, for example. Because Yom Kippur, we spend all day in shul, in the synagogue, just praying all day, or most of the day. It's 5 different prayers. And also, 15 B'Av, we also don't see such a thing today. So we want to understand what is the connection between these 2 days, and what does it mean that these 2 days were dedicated to matchmaking. So now just the fact that we have 2 days of of course matchmaking was held throughout the year, right? People get married all the time and get engaged all the time. But the fact that there were 2 days, and they're not so far apart when you think about it, right? The 15th day of Av is, according to in the Hasidic tradition, that's the day we start saying Ktiva v'chatima tova. We start blessing people for the new year, right? Because we have only a month and a half to the new year, and then 10 more days for Yom Kippur. It's not like they're 6 months apart, these 2 days, like a winter matchmaking holiday or a summer matchmaking holiday or something like this. They're not so far apart, which makes it even more interesting. Why were there 2 days instead of 1? Let's just make one matchmaking holiday. Maybe let's make it the 15th day of Av, because it's a good time, and it's summer, and it's not in the middle of the davening of Yom Kippur. Why 2 days? So whenever we have 2 versions or 2 opportunities to do something, then we have to ask ourselves, we need to tell ourselves that they must symbolize 2 kinds of matchmaking. If we have 2 days, and it's not about being far away from each other, then they must symbolize or stand for or be an opportunity for two different kinds of matchmaking. They must reflect something more inner. But every time we have something in the dimension of time, in the Jewish calendar, or in something in the dimension of time, and want to understand it more deeply, we need to convert the dimension of time into the dimension of soul, let's say this. Let's put it in this way. The dimension of soul means we want to go in deeper, and time is more external than the mind and the psyche and the soul. So 2 days, 2 different events of matchmaking, we want to see them as reflecting or symbolizing 2 kinds of matchmaking which echo 2 levels within our souls, 2 ways of approaching the whole idea of matchmaking. And of course, matchmaking isn't just for singles, because even when you're married, you have to remarry your spouse constantly. If you want to have renewal in your relationship, you need to remarry your spouse all the time. And obviously, if you're not married, then you have to think about matchmaking all the time. Who's your match? So you can approach this from 2 levels, and they're both good, because we know that there were the best of days. Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael. There were no 2 days that were as wonderful, as beautiful, as good as these 2 days. So both matchmaking types are good, but we want to understand what they are. So the first hint comes from the Talmud, the Gemara. The Gemara says, in the very opening of the tractate Sota, it talks about there are 2 opinions as to how a match is made. And the first opinion goes like this. The first opinion says that 40 days before the fetus is formed in the womb, which is really a very elegant, modest way of saying that it's really the time of the union of the father and mother itself. Because we know that the fetus is formed 40 days into the pregnancy. So when Chazal say that 40 days before the fetus is formed, that's really the moment of inception. So in that moment, right, before we're born, before we're formed in the womb, when at the moment of inception, it says that a voice is heard, bat kol, like an echo, a divine echo, is heard somewhere in the heavens. And it says, bat ploni le ploni, the daughter of this and that fellow will marry this and that, this fellow that's being born now. So when the soul is just beginning its descent into this world, it's announced in heavens who they're going to marry. This is the whole concept of there being what we call in English a beshert. A beshert is a divinely ordained spouse, a single person, a single soul out there that I have to meet, and that's my soulmate. So the idea of a soulmate comes from this source. But then there's another opinion, and the other opinion says no, but who says that this voice is sounded when we're born, and it doesn't work this way. It goes lefi ma'asav, according to one's actions, one's choices. It's up to us. If we're living our lives in a certain way, making certain choices, we're going to meet a certain person. If we're going to make different choices, we're going to meet a different person. And then the Gemara adds this opinion, the other opinion, the not spiritual opinion, that doesn't believe in a soulmate, right? It's wonderful that we have in Chazal these 2 opposite opinions, because they reflect 2 very, very basic approaches. So how should we even think about this whole idea of matchmaking? Is there a soulmate, one particular soulmate waiting somewhere for us, and we have to discover who it is? Or is it up to us? It's up to our choice. We have both opinions in the Gemara. It's beautiful. So this second opinion that doesn't believe in a soulmate, but believes that it's up to it's lefi ma'asav, based on one's actions, also says, add something else. And it says that it's hard to bind them, to connect them, kashe lezavgan kekriat yam suf. It's as hard to connect 2 souls as it was difficult to split the Red Sea. Splitting the Red Sea was a miracle, and you have to take one thing and tear it apart into two different things. And it's just as difficult to take two different souls and put them together. Why? Because it isn't divinely ordained. There isn't a soulmate. It's not something that is natural in some way, or was always there somewhere in the heavens and so on. Just a minute. Yeah. So hang on, I just want to check something. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. So two opinions in the Gemara. One, that there's a soulmate and there's this divine echo that's heard at the moment of inception. The other, there's no divine soulmate. It's up to us, and it's hard. It's a difficult thing because we're different souls. We don't have one common soul root. We're two different, distinct individuals with our own habits and with our own perspective, and it's hard work. Right? The second opinion emphasizes the work element of how much we have to work from the bottom up. It's not this divine revelation that we just discover this person and that's it, and we just connect without any problem. So maybe these two types, or these two opinions, right, of matchmaking have to do with the 2 days, the Day of Atonement and the 15th day of Av. Maybe they're connected because, as we said, we have 2 days of matchmaking. They must reflect 2 kinds of matchmaking. And we also know that whenever we have a dispute, in a rabbinic dispute, 2 different opinions in Chazal, the Kabbalistic, Hasidic, soul of the Torah perspective would always be to reconcile them and find ways in which they're both true. And in fact, the Gemara itself does this, and we'll go into this in a minute. To say elu ve'elu, these and these are the words of the living God. Well, we want to have both of them be real in some way. So maybe it's all connected. So let's look at what we know about these 2 days. So we don't know much about the 15th day of Av. We know a little bit. We'll go into this. But we do know a lot about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. We know that in Yom Kippur, we fast, we don't eat, and we don't drink. We know that we need to resemble angels. In fact, we all dress white. It's no big thing that the women wore white in Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur, everyone dresses as white because we want to resemble heavenly angels. So it's the most spiritual day in the Jewish calendar. And the fast isn't because we're sad about the destruction of the temple, or we identify with something bad that happened in Jewish history. It's a positive kind of fasting. It's fasting because we want to really connect to our souls as they exist before they enter this world. We want to reconnect with the root of our souls, the essence of our souls, and that's why we fast, and we're like angels. So it's a very, very spiritual day. So the fact that it's a spiritual day tells us maybe the kind of matchmaking that was held in this day is the kind of matchmaking that reflects the opinion that there is a spiritual soulmate that is heard from above, and it's something that we just need to discover. We're all shedding our skins, so to speak. We're shedding our bodies. We're fasting. We're becoming very spiritual, and we're connecting to our soul root. And we want to discover on this day, because we're fasting, we want to discover who is our soulmate, our spiritual soulmate. That's why we need to elevate ourselves so much. So Yom Kippur becomes the day of, let's call it the day of a match made in heaven. A match made in heaven means we need to elevate ourselves to a heavenly state, and then we can discover who this soulmate, spiritual soulmate is. So it's a match made in heaven. Now, if the Day of Atonement is the spiritual kind of matchmaking, the one that believes in a soulmate, that must mean the Tu B'Av, which is just a regular secular day, and as we said, there's nothing special about it, must be the day that corresponds to the more earthly kind of matchmaking. Let's call it a match made on earth. It's not a match made in heaven. It's based on our own choices, on our own actions, and we're distinct individuals. We're not coming from above, we're coming from below. It's a mundane day, it's a mundane kind of matchmaking. Now, the idea that we have these two kind of matchmaking days, and they're reflected by these two, we have two kinds of matchmaking that are reflected in these 2 days of matchmaking, reflecting something very, very interesting that we see in modern Jewish culture. And it has to do with wedding invitations. When you look at a Haredi, right, an ultra-Orthodox, very frum invitation to a wedding, then, well, let's go from the other direction. When you look at a modern wedding invitation in Hebrew, and there's the name of the groom and the name of the bride, then between them you would see the 3 words, Im Bchirat Libo. Or sometimes it's just the acronym, it's Ein Bet Lamed. Im Bchirat Libo. That is, with his or hers choice of heart. This is my loved one. This is the one I fell in love with, the one that I chose to be with, because I love them. Im Bchirat Libo. The main word here is Bchira, choice. This is what my heart chose, or I chose to follow my heart, and my spouse is my Bchirat Libi, my chosen one, chosen by me, or by my heart, which is me. But if you look at the Haredi invitations, the ultra-Orthodox invitations, it's very hard to put in Bchirat Libo there, because as we all know, the couple don't know each other very well. They know each other a little bit, they go on a few dates, but it's not customary to drag out the dating process, and it's usually somewhere between a few days to a few weeks to maximum a few months, but not more than that. And it's hard to say that it's a choice made in a way that they know each other and they made a choice based on knowing each other very well, because there's a lot of matchmaking effort involved, and the parents are involved, and so on. So there's another expression used, and the other expression used is in bat gilo. In bat gilo is harder to translate. It means the daughter with the daughter, right? The groom with the daughter, or with the person who is, I'll just translate it, not literally, because gil is a very strange word. Gil means mazal. Mazal means something like a soul root. Bat gilo means with one's soulmate. That's the simplest translation. So even a modern Hebrew speaker wouldn't be sure what it means, but that's really what it means. In bat gilo means with the person who is coming from the same kind of soul root, from the same gil. And gil is like a soul root. So the more Haredi invitation is more, let's put it this way, it's more like a Yom Kippur kind of matchmaking. It's more like the matchmaking that's based on the idea of a soulmate and of the heavenly voice sound that it was sounded somewhere in the day of inception. And that's the main approach in the frum world, is that there is a basher, there is a soulmate, and we want to discover it, and we put our faith in the fact that now that they're getting married, surely it must be with their soulmate. So that's what you put in the invitation. However, the more modern, let's say more secular, but it's not just secular because it's also the modern religious world would put this kind of expression, Bchirat Libo, that's a more 15th day of Av, Tu B'Av kind of matchmaking. It's based on one's actions, one's choices. So this is very beautiful, that we see 2 approaches in the Jewish people today, and there, of course, it's a spectrum. And on the one end, you have the ultra-Orthodox, and the other end, you have the secular, or the more modern approaches, but these 2 poles are reflected by these 2 expressions, and these 2 expressions, Bchirat Libo, the choice of my heart, Bat Gilo, my soulmate, it's coming from those 2 different opinions about how a match is made in the Gemara, and it's reflected in the 2 days. Now we see that Yom Kippur is more like a a very religious day. That's how it's perceived today. It's a very, very religious day. It's the most religious day there is. And the 15th day of Av, which has been a little bit neglected, has become maybe more like a secular day. And we really see this today in the way these days are celebrated. Yom Kippur became the symbol of being very, very religious. And in Israel, you see on this day, because it's the holiest of days, that everything stops. Even in the most secular place, which is Tel Aviv, no cars are driven on Yom Kippur. And it's something that has maintained because it was so religious that even secular people observe it in some way. And on the other hand, the Dati world has pretty much abandoned the 15th day of Av. It's still customary to do weddings on that day. But on the other hand, it was happily adopted by the most secular crowds in the sense that it became, here in Israel, it became something very, very secular called Chag HaAhava, the Festival of Love. And of course, it's a very secular kind of love because it's mixed audiences and it's very not frum, let's say. Okay, so and this is something very beautiful. We now see that those 2 days, those two kinds of matchmaking, have really split off, and they also split off into two approaches that are people find. You can see many people that hold to one end of the spectrum, and they don't like the other end. They either think of marriage as something that's totally divinely ordained, and then they don't think so much about the choice element, or it's only the choice element. It's only the fact that it's now, no, there's no soulmate, there's no providence, it's up to us, it's up to our choices and actions and so on. And this polarization is something that has happened to the Jewish people. This is actually connects to the day we're coming from, just 6 days before Tu B'Av, which is Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, which has to do with the hatred or the distance created between the different groups within the people of Israel. So we see this in these two days. Let's just add another characterization to these 2 days before getting to the next level, which is the most important level, which is trying to connect them and to inter-include them, as we always try. Whenever we have two polar opposites, we want to inter-include them and find an element of each one in the other one. And this will also be a way of trying to bridge the two poles within the Jewish people, the religious and the secular. So we're adding one more characterization. The other characterization is again starts with two Hebrew expressions, right? We had the two expressions used on wedding invitations, bchirat libo and bat gilo. Now we have two more idioms in Hebrew that will really help us get a better sense of these two kinds of matchmaking or concepts. So one idiom is very well known. It appears in the Tanakh many times, and that is metziat chen. Limtzo chen is a very strange, very unique Hebrew expression. When translated, it means to like someone, right? If I say ata motze chen be'enai, it means I like you. But literally, it means something very strange. It says ata motze chen be'enai. It says you find favor or grace in my eyes. And it's very strange because I'm the one finding the grace and beauty within you. But I say, most Israelis don't even think about this. When they say this, they say, I like you. But what it literally means, when you stop and think about it, is you find, ata motze chen, you find grace inside my eye. And really what this means, it evokes an image of the two people being reflected inside each other's eye. I like you, that is, I find the grace, the point of grace, the point of beauty, the element of beauty in you. But when I say this, what I'm actually saying is you find the beauty in my eyes. Because what happens is that you see your own reflection in my eye, and I see my own reflection in your eye, and it has to do with us finding, and simultaneously, we find a beauty, an element of beauty inside both of us. But it's our own beauty. That's the thing. למצוא חן, the fact that I like you means I see my reflection in your eyes, and you see your reflection in my eyes, means we recognize true beauty, but it's a beauty that has to do that it echoes something that we already have. I see beauty in your eyes, but this beauty has to do with seeing my own reflection in your eyes. I recognize the kind of beauty that I know how to recognize, that's really the beauty of my own soul. I recognize it within you also. And the same goes for you. You recognize that there's an element of beauty in me that is like your own beauty. So this is metziat chen. The first time this idiom appears in the Bible is regarding Noach. And this is beautiful in itself because Noach is the mirror image. The word Noach, the name Noach, is the mirror image of chen, right? So it's metziat chen. Chen is grace or beauty. And Noach is the same letters as the word chen, but it's in reverse order, nun chet instead of chet nun. So it says Noach matzah chen. So this is itself a kind of symmetrical idiom that reflects this kind of Noach had the grace of God and God had the grace of Noach in some way, and they found grace within each other. Now, so this idiom appears many, many times. But there is another idiom that appears to have the identical kind of meaning, but it's a little different, and it appears only in the scroll of Esther, and it appears 3 times there. And the term is nesiat chen. It's very close to metziat chen, but it says nesiat chen. It says that Esther hayta noset chen be'einei kol ro'eha. So noset chen means raising up the grace. And she would raise up the grace. It means like that when people liked her, it's the same meaning, people liked her. But they like her in a way that somehow they elevated or raised her element of beauty or element of grace. So what does this mean? So on the surface it means the same thing. But the fact that there's not a different expression must mean it means something else. So the explanation given in Chassidut is that nesiat chen is a different kind of love. It's not the love or the kind of recognizing my own beauty, a reflection of my soul in your soul. It's loving you for being different than I am, different from me. And I have to carry your beauty. I have to carry it because it's different from my beauty. I don't just find it. I don't find my own beauty in your eyes, or you find your beauty in my eyes. We need to carry each other's beauty. Carrying each other's beauty has to do with, we need to lift it. Why do we need to lift it? Because it's something different from me. Esther was, in this sense, exotic, right? Exotic means she was different from everybody else, and that's why she was noset chen, not motzet chen. Actually, both is said about her, but so it must have been somehow a combination of both. She was both familiar and different and exotic. So we have these 2 expressions, metziat chen and nesiat chen. So how does this go together with everything we said before? We must say that the kind of matchmaking that has to do with discovering our soulmate, that is embodied by the Day of Atonement, that was the day dedicated to that kind of matchmaking, or to people who believe in a soulmate. That was the day of metziat chen, of finding, because we're looking for our own soulmate, someone that we have the same soul root that is now shared by 2 different bodies, has to do with recognizing our spouse. So it's metziat chen. This is the soul that I've been waiting for all my life, and now I just recognize it. I know. I don't have to choose. I don't have to decide. I don't have to think about it too much, because it's just clear that this is my soulmate, and I just discovered it. So it's finding what I was already inside me in some way, or I just see it and it's like a reflection of a mirror. It's like my other half. It's metziat chen. On the other hand, the other kind of matchmaking, those who don't believe in a soulmate, that think about are making our own choices, and it's as hard as tearing apart the Red Sea, that has to do with being opposites. Because that's why it's so hard. It's so hard because we're very, very different. And that's why it's also a lot of work, and that's why it's also a choice, because it's not so obvious that we should get married. We can see some things in favor of getting married, see some things that are so different, we don't know if we can bridge the distance between us. But still we make the choice. We make the choice despite the differences. So the second kind of matchmaking that's embodied in Tu B'Av is the matchmaking of Nesi'atchen, not Metzi'atchen. So this is, now we really have a good grasp of these two kinds of matchmaking, right? It's a match made in heaven, and it has to do with recognizing our own soulmate that was declared in our moment of inception, so to speak. And there's the Tu B'Av kind of a matchmaking, which is a match made on earth, which has to do with our own choices, the choice of one's heart, and it has to do with finding someone who is different than I am, and connecting them. Now, of course, we very clearly see that if we only think about, if we want to choose either or, if we think about these two kinds of matchmaking ways, or modes of thinking, or mindsets, in an either or fashion, we find ourselves in either one of two big problems. So if we think only about Bat Gilo, being a soulmate, then we're going to come across great difficulties whenever we discover that there are differences between us. And also, we may not be as responsible in the way we decide to get married, because we're not going to feel that there's an element of choice and therefore responsibility. We're going to put it all up to it being a match made in heaven, and the element of choice is not going to be stressed enough. The fact we have to take responsibility and choose and work hard. The element of work will also be more difficult for us, because we're constantly expecting everything to be just perfect as it is. On the other hand, if we're only going for the more secular kind of the more modern kind of approach, which is choosing and working hard, and we're liable to think we may have made a mistake, and maybe it's all up to our choices, or maybe we made a bad choice, and we're not going to look for an element of divine providence and divine and we're not going to look for maybe there's also a soul root that we need to discover that connects us. We're going to constantly think about it in mundane terms, and that will leave us very, very frustrated. And if it's all up to us, it's a heavy load to carry. So we need to inter-include the two kinds, and by inter-including them, we're also really what we're doing on a deeper level is we're continuing the work of Tisha B'Av, of bridging the new modern tribes, the secular tribe and the Orthodox to religious tribe, and of course it divides into all kinds of sub-tribes. And by inter-including the two mindsets, then in a deep way we're also connecting the two. We really want to make it so that we want to make sure that the 15th day of Av isn't just a secular Chag HaAhava holiday, festival of secular love, and we also want to make the Day of Atonement, we want to restore the kind of earthly joy that was there when the women were dancing in the vineyards, and which it seems like something very secular. So by inter-including them, is we're really bridging the material and the spiritual, and the mundane and the heavenly. So now, in order to do this, we're going to look briefly at the answer and different interpretations to this answer that was given in the tractate of Sotah, in the Talmud, when the two opinions as to how a match is being made, right? One opinion that it's a heavenly decree, the other that it's human choices. How did the sages reconcile these? So they said something very, very enigmatic, and we're going to look at different interpretations very briefly for this enigmatic answer, and then finally we'll get to the kind of answer that really puts it all together. So the answer given was that, and you'll see why it's enigmatic in a second, is that the opinion that it's a soulmate that was decreed in the moment of inception. They said this is true regarding first zivug, zivug rishon, the first match, and it's unclear what they mean by this. And then the other opinion that it's our own choices and it's hard that applies to a second zivug, right? Second match. So now there are all kinds of interpretations as to what this means. So one interpretation is that it's just it goes according to the dimension of time. The first time you marry, that was the one shidduch that was divinely ordained. That was the soul that in the heavens it was decreed when you were born that you're going to marry, your first spouse. But then if you get divorced or you're a widow and you have a second marriage or any other kind of marriage, second, third, whatever, that has to do with your own choices. So this is a pshat, simple answer, a straightforward answer. It's explanation that it's a first match and a second match. That's the simple way to look at it. However, it doesn't go along with a lot of people's experiences. A lot of people experience that sometimes it's only their second marriage that's better than their first marriage, and they feel that their second marriage was in fact higher, was more like their soulmate. So now comes the Arizal, right? The Holy Ari, the Kabbalist of Tzfat, 16th century, and he has a totally different interpretation. He says that the first and second zivug has nothing to do with time. It's not the order of your getting married. It's just two types, as we're saying here, two types of match. Sometimes you merit to find your soulmate, and that's your first zivug, even if it's your second wife or your second husband, because it's the first level, it's the highest level of match. Is when you find your soulmate, or was destined to be your soulmate. It can be your second or third spouse. And the second zivug, again, it's not the second in time, it's just a lower level zivug, so it appears, that it's a zivug of opposite, it has to do with your choices, and it's very hard. And some people get to marry in the first kind of way, and they have an easier time, and it has to do with how refined they are. And also, and for other people, it's a second level of zivug. It has to do with and it's harder for them. They're less refined. And then he adds something else to this. He says it also depends whether you were reincarnated already or not. Right? The area talks a lot about reincarnation. So if you're a new soul, this is your first time around on this earthly level, on earthly realm, then you're a new soul. You're very pristine. You're pure. And then you get to meet your first zivug, right? It's your first zivug both in time, because it's your first incarnation in this world, and it's also your spiritual zivug. However, if you're a reincarnated soul, and now we should add, according to the Arizal, in our generation, almost all of us are reincarnated souls. So just by the fact that we are reincarnated souls, that means that for all of us, or for anyone who's reincarnated, which is almost all of us, it's going to be the second kind of zivug. It's going to be the hard one, meeting an opposite, overcoming our differences, constantly choosing, not having spiritual clarity as to who our match is, or that we made the right choice, and we have to work on very hard because we're incarnated souls. Means we have levels, and we're carrying all kinds of things from past lives and so on. Now there are more explanations that I'm not going to go into, but I'm going to just go directly to the interpretation that touches most our own generation, which is the Hasidic interpretation. The Hasidic interpretation is that every match, every zivug, every husband and wife have a little bit of both. They may be more like the first kind of zivug, which is the first kind of match, which is feeling that it was divinely ordained and we found our soulmate. And it could be that it's primarily the second kind of zivug, that it's hard and we're not sure, but we're choosing anyway, and we have a lot of things to overcome, differences and arguments and so on. But ultimately, every zivug is made up of both. And just having this idea in mind really, really opens this whole thing very beautifully. And now we can see, now let's just go with the two types. So let's imagine that we're the more Haredi type zivug, that we found each other and we very early on recognized that this is my soulmate, my bat gili, and we felt it was made in heaven, a match made in heaven. The fact that all matches are inter-included means that even there, either the day after you get married, or a month later, or a year later, or just before you get married, but sooner or later, there's going to come a moment that this shared soul root is, you're not going to feel it. You're going to feel that you're very different souls. You're very, very different. You're very separate. And suddenly it's like a cloud covering the sun. You were absolutely sure you found the right match, and suddenly the other person says something, or has an opinion, or does something that makes you feel like they're an alien. There's something else, and suddenly it's like a cloud covering the sun. You're not sure it's your spouse anymore. You're not sure it's your soulmate anymore. And then you have to work. Then you have to, and then you can't escape it. There's going to come a day in which you have to do the work that's as difficult as tearing the Red Sea, which is bridging the concepts. The work element has to be there. And you also see this, that even in the Haredi matchmaking way, the halacha says there has to be an element of choice. It says, Asur le'adam lekadesh isha ad she'ir'ena. The groom has to see the bride, he has to choose. Also says that the bride has to willingly choose. You can't have forced marriage, although that's how it's described in the media many times, and sometimes that's how it is. It's not the halachic way. You can't force a marriage. It's asur. There has to be an element of choice, because there is an element of work and choice in every zivug, even the one that's more like the heavenly zivug. Now let's imagine it's an earthly kind of zivug. There was no feeling of the sky opening up and a revelation being made and a voice being heard in the heaven. You dated and you saw some things that were good, some things that weren't, some things that matched, some things that didn't, and then you thought about it hard and you decided to go for it, and you're choosing and you're working. You're working on getting the marriage to work. But if you add the element of bat gilo, of there being a soulmate, something incredible happens. If you say to yourself, we're different souls, we're different people, and we have to work on our marriage and reconcile our differences and work on maintaining a good dialogue. But as we're doing this, we're gradually exposing and revealing a common soul root that was always there waiting for us. And it's like hovering above our heads. And as we're digging and as we're working, struggling to communicate and to work on our marriage, we're really just exposing. It's like we talked about it, I don't know if you talked about it, but there are two kinds of sculpture. One in which you build you put more and more material until it adds up to the statue, or you carve it. And when you carve it, you really reveal the statue that's there. That's really the two kinds of matchmaking. But the idea is that even the sculptor that adds material and creates a form, not the one that carves it out of the stone, the same famous sentence that Michelangelo said. Michelangelo was a carver, and he said the statue is already in the stone, you just need to reveal it, discover it, you just have to expose it. It's already there. The same applies to a sculpture that is being made from nothing just by adding more and more material. You add it, you also expose something that was there, an idea of the sculpture, an image that was there to begin with, and you're exposing it. So when we're looking at these two days as these two modes, ways, kinds, types of matchmaking, in this way, we're really starting to inter-include them. And so if you're more like the first kind of couple, then you're more ready to do the work and to have the element of choice, and it's going together. And if you're more like the second type, which is the more mundane, from below to above, it really helps to feel that there's this higher kind of pull, which is that there is also a soul root. If it's not so clear and obvious and we don't experience it so profoundly, it's there, and it's waiting for us to discover it. And of course, when we extend this notion, then really what we want to do is we're thinking about the ultra-Orthodox pole within the Jewish people and the secular pole within the Jewish people as representing these two types of matchmaking concepts. Then the more we inter-include them, we're really inter-including the different vibe and energy and different light. Really, there's light in the secular world, and there's light in the ultra-Orthodox, in the frum world. And the lights need to inter-include the element of choice and of work and of appreciating our differences and working with our differences, which is the 15th day of Av, more secular kind of concept, is sorely needed in the frum world. It's sorely needed because then you celebrate the differences, you enjoy the differences, and you enjoy the work, and you realize that it's of course, it all comes from heaven, it all comes from above, but the difficulties are a wonderful, amazing blessing, and it forces you to connect to yourself as a chooser, as someone who constantly chooses their spouse again and again and again. And this is something which is more lacking in the frum world. And of course, in the non-frum world, what's sorely lacking equally, it's sorely lacking the idea that there is a divine match, that there is that if we ended up together, that must mean we have a common soul root, and we need to discover it. And this kind of faith and this kind of vision that we have a soulmate, that we have a common soul root as a couple, could really elevate everything. And of course, not just that, but it would also add an element of let's say, awe to the festival of love, to the secular festival of love, because it would add the element of there being a divine element within us, a divine soul. And just thinking in these terms would already change completely the atmosphere of the secular Chag HaAhava, the festival of love. And we see this, right? We said that even in the Orthodox match, there has to be an element of choice. We see that in the 15th day of Av, they also wore white. So this is very interesting. We said that in the Day of Atonement, everyone wears white. But in the 15th day of Av, it's very special that you wear white. The reason you wear white on the 15th day of Av is to remind you of the Day of Atonement. You need to have a little bit of the Day of Atonement on the 15th day of Av, and that adds the element of awe to love, and the match becomes holier and more spiritual. And you also have to have the element of dancing and choosing and the emotional element and the human element in the Day of Atonement and in the kind of matchmaking embodied by the Day of Atonement. So we're going to finish by just saying one thing, which is that this whole concept of inter-including the tribes, the secular and the religious, this whole mindset is more like the 15th day of Av mindset, and it is like the Day of Atonement mindset. Why? Because it is said that on the 15th day of Av, one of the things that happened, one of the reasons it became a special day, was that once the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, right? We said it's a mundane day, it has to do with the land. So once they entered the land, they removed the prohibition that was added in the desert that the tribes should never marry one another. They should only marry within the tribes. There was a prohibition made after the whole story of the daughters of Tzofchad and their uncles, and it was decided in the desert that you can only marry within your tribe. You can't marry other tribes. But that prohibition was removed once they entered the land of Israel. It was removed on the 15th day of Av. So the 15th day of Av, it has to do with the 15th day of Av being a a nesiat chen kind of day, a day of marrying someone who's different, from a different tribe, a different spiritual tribe, has a different soul root. So really what I'm saying in all of this is that in our generation, we need to combine the two kinds of matchmaking, but this whole kind of thinking means that the main matchmaking day is the 15th day of Av. That's the main mindset. We want to appreciate and celebrate the differences. We want to accentuate the work and the choice and the hard work that's put into finding a way to see that this kind of soul that's so different from me is still my own soulmate, and we have the same soul root despite our differences. This is the main challenge for our generation. We're all reincarnated souls. We're all mostly the second kind of zivug. So that's the main thing to work on, and that also puts us into the mindset of inter-including and connecting these two kinds of matches. So that's our shiur for this week, and may we all have a very, very happy, very wonderful 15 B'Av day, a very happy day, and it's a good day to think about matchmaking, helping our single friends, helping ourselves if we're single, working on our own relationships if we're not single, and may we all merit to see our relationships form and grow and evolve, and that we love the differences that we have between us, and we see how they complement, and we're not going to just expect having metziat chen, we'll also want to have nesiat chen, seeing the beauty of difference, how different my soulmate is, and it's just perfect for me. It's perfect in how it's different from me. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording and open the microphones.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, so you can open them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to address the questions that were put here. Someone wrote to me, it's very hard, all this talk about secular and religious. Perhaps someone wrote to me, and I'm going to read this out loud. It's very hard to hear all this talk about secular and religious. Perhaps we can find another way to describe these holy Jews who are just not as close yet. It seems to pit Jews against Jews. No, it's the very opposite of what I tried to do here. Regardless of what we may see with our eyes, we can look beyond what we see, with our physical sight, to reach the soul level beneath. Yeah, so that's the whole point of the shiur. The whole point of the shiur was to see that there's light in both elements, and not just that, but I really tried at the end to elevate and celebrate the more secular kind of matchmaking mindset, which is the Tu B'Av, the 15th day of Av mindset. So that was the whole point, is to have this Hasidic approach that sees that there's something very precious about both tribes, so to speak, and that we need to include the elements of truth and beauty in both groups within the Jewish people. Yeah.